Good morning, Terrace View Presbyterian Church. It is good to be with you again, virtually, because this is the way we do things right now. And that is okay, because we're still able to worship God together, which is fantastic. So this morning, I am going to preach from the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verses 1 through 11, which happens to be one of my favorite passages in the Old Testament. And it's not just because it's a text that's got beautiful language, but because the message that's given within the images in the language in this passage. And to me, that is one of the most interesting aspects of this passage. Also, one of the things that I've noticed about this passage as I was preparing for this sermon is that this is a passage that was written to the nation of Israel. Not necessarily to those of us who are New Testament Christians, but God wrote it to the nation of Israel. So what does that all mean, you might be asking? This passage is about God with a message to Israel, who was originally named Jacob. But you got to go all the way back to Genesis to deliver that story. So if you would think this is kind of sort of a personal letter to Jacob, Israel, one and the same, separate. An individual and a nation. But then it can also be a message to us as contemporary Christians, as New Testament Christians, Christians in today's world. There is so much richness in this chapter. There's fear, there's abandonment, there's scatteredness, there's unknown, and so much more. And so now I have a good idea what you're thinking. How could all of those things be richness? And why on earth would that make it my favorite passage in the Old Testament? Just wait. Hang on. Here we go. You will see, and you probably all know, that at some point in our lives we've all experienced at least one of these obstacles as we've been journeying along in this thing we call life. Maybe they haven't quite looked like the typical definition, but we've been there. Perhaps your feeling scatteredness is from the outside distractions that has come to you as you try and move forward out of these months of our time out. Perhaps your fear has everything to do with when will we be able to come together in the church building and see each other face to face and celebrate freedom, so to speak. Maybe your feelings of abandonment are because you can't see God anywhere right now. No matter how hard you look, you can't see the God that you love so much that somehow feels so distant away. All of these things are very, very real to us on so many levels. Levels that are to each one of us very different at the same time. So let's look at the imagery in the passage in Isaiah. In the words, water, fire, rivers, flames. Can you see what I'm thinking now? God has called each and every one of us. Think about it. God has called you by name. God is with you all the time. Even in those moments when you were feeling abandoned by God. As if God is nowhere around, God is still with you. God is right there by your side. God is right there through each step of the journey. You might not sense God. You might wonder. You might question. But guess what? God is there. I have loved water my entire life. When I was a kid, itty bitty little kid, my family used to go to Priest Lake every summer for vacation. My brothers, who are all older than I am, and my dad would be out in the lake swimming around doing their thing. Well, apparently I wanted to be in the lake with them. So I would get my little legs going and I would run off the end of the dock. Now, mind you, I was only about 3 years old at the time that I was taking that plunge off the dock. And my dad told me that they would let me splash around and paddle around, and then they would pick me up and put me back on the dock. And of course, you know what I did. I started running off the end of that dock and I jumped in the water again, and I would splash around and they would put me up on the dock. It was a vicious cycle, and we would do it all over again several times as we were swimming away. Apparently my dad thought it was rather hilarious that I was doing this several times as they were out in the water, but my mother was terrified. You see, my mother was deathly afraid of water, but she never, ever, ever wanted her kids to develop that same fear. So as much as a mother can let go, she let me run off the end of that dock and splash around because she knew that my dad and my brothers would make sure that I was safe. That's exactly what God does for us. We may run off the end of the dock many, many times, and we may splash around until we are exhausted. But there God is, keeping us safe, making sure that those waters never come up over our heads to the point where we can't breathe. How about those times in life when everything, no matter what it might be, feels like your entire life, your entire world is going up in flames? Kind of like our friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Perhaps it might be an illness that you're dealing with. Maybe right now it's unemployment. There's a lot of people that are unemployed right now. Maybe it's some family issues. Maybe being home together has been a little bit too much. Maybe it's depression or mental health issues. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you can't get that fire to go out. And you feel like you are being consumed by those flames on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, maybe even a minute by minute basis. Well, and just like our friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were worshiping the Lord in extreme heat, God has got us. It's kind of like we have all kinds of heat shield protections all over us that God has provided for us. The only place you can get that sort of intense heat shield is from God. And we, like our toasty 3 friends, just have to have the faith that God will pull us out of those flames so that we continue on with life's journeys. I recently watched a Disney movie called Moana. I'd never seen it before, first time I had ever seen it. Had heard good things about it, and what an amazing story of faith that movie is. When Moana is a small child, she felt called to the sea. It literally kept pulling her to the sea. But her parents, much like my mom probably, was afraid to let her go beyond the reef from their island. I don't want to give the movie away in case you haven't seen it, but there is a point in the movie where Moana does go beyond the reef in order to save her people on the island. It's not an easy journey, not at all. She wants to give up several times on the journey. but she draws strength. And she draws that strength from an amazing source. Maybe it's one that we would see as God in our own lives. You'll have to watch the movie to see what happens. It is a very, very great movie, and I highly recommend it. And I also recommend that you have some tissues nearby, just in case your eyes start to leak a little bit. One of the recent water journeys, flames, struggles, whatever you want to call it, that I've been dealing with, as some of you know, is I broke my foot again for the third time. When I was sharing about this with a friend of mine, she said to me, "I'm so sorry you're broken." And I got thinking about that statement later, and especially in the context of this passage. We are all broken. That's why we need the cross. God calls us by name. We are redeemed through God's love. And God's love is so very, very deep for us that God gave us Jesus. Jesus is our PFD, our personal flotation device, so that we can always keep our heads above the water, so that no matter what might come at us, whatever big waves might try and knock us down, Jesus is always going to be there to keep us upright and help us through the journey. Amen.